A woman with a scarred face, a dying man with a fortune in silver, and a blizzard that would either kill them both or forge the most dangerous alliance Montana had ever seen. What happened next in that frozen mountain shack would shake the entire territory to its core. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Red Hollow Hotel, and Evelyn Mercer felt her stomach twist into a knot that had nothing to do with the rough ride. Through the frosted window, she could see him, Caleb Whitmore, standing on the boardwalk in a fur-lined coat that probably cost more than she'd earned in 5 years at the textile mill. He was broader than she'd imagined from his letters, with the kind of confident posture that came from never having been told no. Her fingers found the scar on her left cheek, tracing the raised line that ran from her temple to her jaw. The factory accident had happened 3 years ago. The marriage contract had been signed 2 months ago, and Caleb Whitmore had never seen her face. "Red Hollow, miss," the driver called down. "End of the line." Evelyn pulled her threadbare coat tighter and stepped down into the November cold. Montana bit different than Pennsylvania, sharper, meaner, like the cold had teeth. Snow was already starting to fall, fat flakes that melted on her eyelashes. Caleb was watching her. She saw the moment he registered the scar, saw something shift behind his eyes. Not shock exactly, something colder. "Miss Mercer?" His voice carried across the street, loud enough that heads turned. There were maybe 20 people on the boardwalk, and every one of them stopped what they were doing to watch. "Mr. Whitmore?" Evelyn forced herself to stand straight to meet his gaze. "I'm pleased to finally—" "What the hell is that on your face?" The words hit like a slap. Around them, the street had gone quiet except for the wind and the nervous stamping of horses tied to hitching posts. "I wrote to you about the accident," Evelyn said, hating how small her voice sounded. "The letter I sent in September. You wrote that you'd been injured." Caleb descended the steps slowly, his boots loud on the wooden planks. "You didn't write that you were disfigured." Heat crawled up Evelyn's neck despite the cold. She was aware of the watching faces, the whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. A woman in an expensive green dress stood in the hotel doorway, one hand covering her mouth. "The scar doesn't affect my ability to— To what? Be seen with me?" Caleb's laugh was harsh. "I'm one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory, Miss Mercer. I have a reputation to maintain. Standards." Evelyn's hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists inside her coat pockets. "We have a contract." "Had." Caleb pulled a folded paper from his inside pocket. She recognized the marriage agreement, the one she'd signed with such hope back in Philadelphia, imagining a new life in the West. He held it up so everyone could see it, then tore it cleanly in half. "No contract now." The pieces fluttered to the muddy street. "You can't!" Evelyn's voice cracked. "I sold everything to come here. I used my last money for the train fare and the stage. You sent me the ticket yourself. You should have sent a photograph first." Caleb turned away, dismissing her like she was nothing. "There's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Chen takes charity cases." "I'm not a charity case." The words burst out of Evelyn before she could stop them, sharp and desperate. "I worked 12-hour days in that factory. I saved every penny. I came here because you promised—" "I promised to marry a woman." Caleb glanced back over his shoulder, and his eyes were flat and cruel. "Not whatever you are now." Someone in the crowd laughed. The sound cut through Evelyn like broken glass. She stood there in the falling snow, watching Caleb Whitmore climb back up the hotel steps, watching the door close behind him, watching the crowd begin to disperse now that the entertainment was over. The woman in the green dress was still staring, and Evelyn saw pity in her face, which was somehow worse than the cruelty. Her trunk sat in the street where the driver had dropped it. Everything she owned in the world, packed into one battered case. Evelyn picked up the torn halves of the marriage contract from the mud. The ink was already running, Caleb's signature bleeding into illegibility. She folded them carefully and put them in her pocket anyway, though she couldn't have said why. The boarding house Mrs. Chen ran was a narrow building wedged between a saloon and a shuttered dry goods store. The woman who answered Evelyn's knock was small and ancient, with sharp black eyes that took in everything: the scar, the cheap coat, the desperation. "Rooms are $2 a week," Mrs. Chen said. "Payment in advance." Evelyn opened her coin purse. After the stage fare, she had $1.37 to her name.
I can pay 67 cents now, and I'll find work tomorrow to $2. Mrs. Chen started to close the door. Please. Evelyn put her hand against the wood, stopping it. I have nowhere else to go. The storm is getting worse. I just need...
Not my problem. The old woman's face was stone. You think you're the first girl to come west chasing a dream? Happens twice a month. The ones who can't pay don't last long. The door closed in Evelyn's face. She stood there for a long moment, snow collecting on her shoulders, before turning back toward the main street. The wind had picked up, driving the snow horizontal now. Through the growing white curtain, she could see warm lights in windows, smoke rising from chimneys. Red Hollow was shutting itself against the storm, and she wasn't part of it. The mercantile was still open, barely. The man behind the counter looked up when Evelyn entered, his expression souring when he saw her face. Storm supplies are nearly sold out, he said before she could speak, and I don't extend credit. I'm not asking for credit. Evelyn set her coins on the counter. What can I buy with $1.37? He counted the money with thick fingers. Bread's a nickel. Got some jerky that's maybe too tough to sell, I'll let it go for a dime. Matches are 3 cents a box. I'll take 2 loaves of bread, all the jerky, and 3 boxes of matches. That left her with 94 cents. And a wool blanket if you have one cheap enough. Cheapest blanket I got is $2. He saw her face fall and shrugged. Got a canvas tarp that's got a tear in it, 50 cents. Evelyn did the math in her head. That would leave her with 44 cents and no shelter. The tarp, she said quietly, and a candle if you have one. He wrapped her purchases in brown paper without comment. The candle went in for free, a small mercy she hadn't expected. Back on the street, the snow was already ankle-deep and coming down so thick she could barely see across to the other side. Evelyn hefted her trunk and started walking, though she had no idea where she was going. Just away. Away from the hotel where Caleb Whitmore was probably sitting down to a hot meal. Away from the boarding house that had turned her out. Away from the staring faces and the whispers. At the edge of town, a man on horseback passed her going the opposite direction. He was hunched against the wind, his hat pulled low, but he reined in when he saw her. You lost? His voice was rough, hard to hear over the storm. No, Evelyn lied. He looked at her trunk, at the paper-wrapped bundle under her arm, at the snow already covering her coat. Town's the other way. I know. Ain't nothing out this direction but mountains and death. He leaned down slightly, and she could see weathered features beneath the hat brim, a gray beard crusted with ice. Storm like this, you won't make it a mile. Thank you for your concern, Evelyn kept walking. Your funeral, the man called after her, but she heard something else in his voice. Maybe respect, maybe just recognition that she was already dead and knew it. The road out of Red Hollow turned into a trail, turned into nothing but white emptiness. Evelyn's feet were numb in her thin boots within 20 minutes. Her trunk felt like it weighed 100 pounds, and twice she had to stop and rest, setting it down in the snow while she caught her breath in air, so cold it burned her lungs. She should turn back. She knew that. Even if they threw her in jail for vagrancy, even if they ran her out of town on a rail, it was better than dying out here in the dark and the cold. But the thought of walking back into Red Hollow, of seeing Caleb Whitmore's satisfied face, of hearing that laughter again. No. She kept walking. The shack appeared out of the storm like something from a fever dream. 1 minute there was nothing but white and wind. The next there was a dark shape, a sagging roof, walls that leaned drunkenly to one side. Evelyn stumbled toward it, dragging her trunk through snow that was now past her knees. The door hung crooked on leather hinges. She pushed it open and fell inside, out of the wind, into darkness that smelled like old smoke and mouse droppings and abandonment. It took 3 tries to light a match with her frozen fingers. In the flickering light, she saw one room barely 12 feet square, a stone fireplace that looked like it might collapse if you breathed on it wrong, a pile of ancient straw in one corner that had probably been a bed once. No furniture, no glass in the single window, just a hole in the wall with a piece of rotted hide stretched across it. Home sweet home, Evelyn said to the darkness, and then she started to laugh. It came out jagged and wrong, edging toward something that wasn't laughter at all. She got control of herself, barely. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Not yet. Survive first. Break down later. The fireplace was full of old ashes and debris, but the chimney seemed clear when she looked up. There was wood stacked against one wall, so dry and old it crumbled in her hands, but it would burn. She built a small fire with shaking hands, feeding it carefully until the flames caught and held. Heat. The feeling coming back to her fingers was agony, pins and needles that made her gasp. She spread the torn tarp on the floor near the fire and sat down on it, pulling her knees to her chest. Outside, the storm screamed like something alive. Evelyn ate one piece of jerky and half a loaf of bread, forcing herself to chew slowly, even though she wanted to devour all of it. She didn't know how long she'd be here, didn't know when or if she'd have money for more food. The 44 cents in her pocket wouldn't buy much of anything. The fire burned down to coals. She fed it more wood, then wrapped herself in her coat and lay down on the tarp, as close to the warmth as she dared. Through the hole where the window should be, she could see nothing but white chaos. She thought about her mother, dead 6 years now. Thought about the factory where she'd spent 5 years breathing cotton dust and watching her youth disappear into the machines. Thought about the letter that had arrived 8 months ago, written in Caleb Whitmore's strong hand, talking about Montana and opportunities, and how he was looking for a sensible woman to build a life with. "I don't need beauty," he'd written. "I need someone with backbone, someone who can handle frontier life, someone who won't faint at the sight of blood or hard work." She'd believed him, had let herself imagine being wanted, being chosen, being something other than the scarred girl everyone looked past. "Liar," Evelyn whispered to the darkness. Then she closed her eyes and tried to sleep. She didn't know how long she'd been unconscious when the sound woke her. At first she thought it was just the storm, the wind finding a new way to howl through the cracks in the walls. But then it came again, and it was different, lower, human. Evelyn sat up, her heart suddenly hammering. The fire had burned down to almost nothing, just a few red embers casting barely enough light to see by. The storm had lessened. She could hear the difference in the wind, but snow was still falling. The sound came a third time, a groan, weak and pain-filled, from just outside the door. Every instinct screamed at her to stay put, to stay quiet, to pretend she hadn't heard anything. But she was already moving, adding wood to the fire with shaking hands, lighting the candle with a burning stick. She opened the door. A man lay crumpled in the snow 3 feet from the threshold, face down, one arm reaching toward the shack like he'd been crawling. He wasn't moving except for the shallow rise and fall of his back. Evelyn stood there, candle in hand, snow blowing into the shack around her. Every practical bone in her body said to close the door. She had almost no food, no money, no resources. She was barely surviving herself. Whatever this man's story was, it wasn't her problem. But she could see blood in the snow beneath him. Could see how he was dressed, worn buckskins, no coat, clothes that would have been inadequate even before whatever happened to him. Could see that he was dying. "Damn it," Evelyn said and set down the candle. Getting him inside was a nightmare. He was dead weight, easily twice her size, and every time she tried to move him, he made a sound that went through her like a knife. But she got her hands under his arms and pulled, dragged him inch by terrible inch across the threshold and into the shack. In the firelight, she could see him clearly for the first time. 40, maybe 50 years old, though it was hard to tell under the dirt and blood and frostbite. Long dark hair going gray, a beard that hadn't been trimmed in months. And blood. There was so much blood soaking through his shirt on the left side, still flowing sluggishly. "Can you hear me?" Evelyn knelt beside him, putting her hand against his throat to feel for a pulse. It was there, but weak and irregular. "What happened to you?" His eyes fluttered open. They were startlingly blue against his weathered face, and for a moment they focused on her with perfect clarity. "Shot," he managed. "They shot me." "Who shot you?" "Whitmore's men." He coughed, and blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Caleb. Whitmore." Evelyn went very still. "What?" "Wants the mountain." The man's eyes were drifting closed again. "Can't let him." "Stay awake." Evelyn grabbed his shoulders, shook him gently. "Stay with me. I need to see how bad you're hurt." She had to cut his shirt away. The blood had frozen it to his skin. The wound underneath made her stomach turn. A bullet hole just below his ribs on the left side, still bleeding. She didn't know much about gunshot wounds, but she knew enough to know this was bad.
The bullet was still in there somewhere, and every minute it stayed was a minute closer to infection and death.
Evelyn sat back on her heels, looking at this dying stranger in her stolen firelight. She had $1.37, no, 44 cents. She had enough food for maybe 3 days if she stretched it. She had no medical supplies, no doctor, no help coming. The smart thing would be to make him comfortable and let him die. The kind thing, even. But Evelyn Mercer had never been smart about self-preservation. She looked at the 44 cents she'd dumped onto the floor, then at the man bleeding onto her tarp. Then she put her coat back on. "I'll be back," she told him, though she wasn't sure he could hear her anymore. "Don't you dare die while I'm gone." The storm had eased to light snow, but the cold was vicious. Evelyn ran back toward Red Hollow, her lungs screaming, her feet sliding in the drifts. The town was mostly dark now, shuttered against the night, but there was still light showing from the mercantile. She pounded on the door until the owner opened it, scowling. "We're closed. I need medical supplies." Evelyn pushed inside before he could stop her. "Bandages, carbolic if you have it, laudanum, needle, and thread. That'll run you $5 at least." He crossed his arms. "Thought you were tapped out." Evelyn pulled off her mother's wedding ring, the only thing of value she owned, and slapped it on the counter. "This is gold, real gold. It's worth 10 times what I'm asking for." He picked up the ring, squinting at it in the lamplight. "Maybe worth $2. "It's worth 10 and you know it." Evelyn leaned forward. "A man is dying. I don't have time to argue." Something in her voice must have gotten through to him. He sighed and went to gather supplies, moving with infuriating slowness. Bandages, a brown bottle of carbolic acid, another of laudanum, a needle already threaded with catgut. "This is $3 worth," he said. "I'm being generous." Evelyn took the supplies and ran back into the night, leaving her mother's ring on the counter. Behind her, she heard the mercantile door lock. The stranger was still breathing when she got back, but barely. She built up the fire until the shack was almost warm, then laid out her supplies with shaking hands. The carbolic acid would hurt like hell, but it would clean the wound. The laudanum would help with the pain, she hoped. The needle and thread. She'd never sewn flesh before, but she'd sewn buttonholes for 5 years in the factory. How different could it be? Very different, as it turned out. The man, she still didn't know his name, screamed when she poured the carbolic into the wound, a sound that echoed off the shack's walls and made her want to vomit. But she held him down and kept pouring until the bottle was half empty, washing out as much blood and debris as she could. Finding the bullet was worse. She had to use her fingers, probing into the wound while he thrashed and groaned. Twice she had to stop and step outside to retch into the snow. But finally she felt it, hard and round and foreign, lodged against something that might have been a rib. She got her fingers around it and pulled. The bullet came free in a gush of fresh blood. Evelyn dropped it and pressed a wad of bandages against the wound, applying pressure until the bleeding slowed. Then she picked up the needle. Her hands were surprisingly steady. Maybe because she was too exhausted to shake anymore. Maybe because some part of her had gone numb to all of this. The pain, the fear, the absolute insanity of what she was doing. She sewed him up with small, careful stitches, the way she'd been taught to sew the finest seams. When she was done, the wound was closed, crude but functional. She wrapped it in clean bandages and sat back, looking at her work. He'd stopped screaming, stopped moving altogether. For one terrible moment she thought he was dead, but then she saw his chest rise and fall, slow and shallow but regular. Evelyn collapsed next to him, too tired to even crawl to the tarp. She lay on the cold floor and watched the fire burn, watched the snow fall through the broken window, watched this stranger breathe. "You're welcome," she whispered, and closed her eyes. When she woke, weak gray light was filtering through the window. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a world buried in white, and the man was watching her. "You saved my life," he said. His voice was rough, barely more than a whisper, but there was wonder in it. Evelyn sat up slowly, every muscle in her body screaming, "Don't thank me yet. You might still die." "What's your name?" "Evelyn Mercer." She moved closer, checking his bandages. They were soaked through with blood and fluid, but the bleeding had stopped. "The wound needs to be cleaned again. This is going to hurt. Can't hurt worse than getting shot." He watched her work, his blue eyes tracking every movement. "I'm Silas. Silas Granger." "Nice to meet you, Silas." Evelyn poured more carbolic over the wound, and he hissed through his teeth but didn't scream this time. "You said Caleb Whitmore's men shot you. Why?" "You know Caleb Whitmore?" "We've met." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "He's the reason I'm in this shack instead of somewhere warm." Silas was quiet while she rebandaged the wound. When she was done, he said, "There's silver on my mountain. Iron Ridge, about 5 miles north of here. Richest vein in Montana, maybe the whole territory." Evelyn sat back. "And Whitmore wants it." "Whitmore wants everything." Silas's jaw tightened. "I filed the claim 3 years ago, legal and proper. But he thinks because he's rich and I'm just a mountain man living in a cave, he can take it. Sent his boys to kill me and forge a new claim." "They almost succeeded." "Would have if you hadn't—" He trailed off, looking at her with something like awe. "Why'd you do it? You don't know me. Could have let me die and kept your supplies." Evelyn thought about that, about standing in the street while Caleb Whitmore tore up their contract, about the door closing in her face at the boarding house, about all the times in her life she'd been turned away, looked past, dismissed as worthless. "Because someone should have helped me," she said quietly, "and no one did." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind outside. Finally, Silas spoke again. "That mine is worth a fortune, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. Whitmore knows it. That's why he wants me dead." He looked at her, and there was something fierce in his eyes, despite his weakness. "If I die, promise me you'll file the claim yourself. It's in my name now, but I got no family, no one to leave it to. You take it. Use that money to build whatever life you want." "You're not going to die," Evelyn said firmly. "I didn't spend my mother's wedding ring on carbolic acid just to watch you give up." The corner of his mouth twitched. "You spent your mother's ring on me?" "It was all I had left." She shrugged, trying to make it sound casual. "Besides, it's just a ring. She's been gone 6 years. I think she'd understand." Silas reached out and grabbed her hand. His grip was weak but earnest. "Then I owe you more than my life. I owe you everything you gave up to save it." "You don't owe me anything." Evelyn pulled her hand back gently. "Just get better. That's all I'm asking." But even as she said it, she knew things had changed. She'd tied her fate to the strangers when she pulled that bullet from his side. And if Caleb Whitmore's men had tried to kill him once, they'd try again, which meant both of them were in danger now. Evelyn looked at the dying fire, at their dwindling supplies, at the wounded man who held the secret to a silver fortune. Outside, the world was frozen and hostile. Inside, they had maybe 3 days of food and almost no way to defend themselves. But she'd survived this long. She'd made it through the factory, through her mother's death, through coming west on nothing but hope and finding rejection instead. She'd survived Caleb Whitmore's cruelty and a blizzard that should have killed her. She could survive this too. She had to. Because somewhere out there in the Montana winter, men with guns were looking for Silas Granger. And when they found him, they'd find her too. Evelyn fed another piece of wood to the fire and settled in to wait. The real fight was just beginning. Silas spent the first 2 days slipping in and out of fever dreams, talking to people who weren't there. Evelyn learned to recognize the patterns. When he was lucid enough to drink water, when he needed more laudanum, when the fever spiked so high she had to pack snow around him to keep him from burning up from the inside. She rationed their food down to nothing. A quarter loaf of bread in the morning, split between them. 1 piece of jerky at midday. The rest she saved because she didn't know how long this would last, and starvation was just as deadly as a bullet. On the 3rd morning, Silas woke clear-eyed and asked for food. "That's a good sign," Evelyn said, handing him a piece of jerky that had gone so tough it was like chewing leather. "Your fever broke sometime in the night." He ate slowly, wincing every time he moved wrong and pulled at his stitches. "How long have I been out?" 3 days since I found you. You've been awake off and on, but mostly you've been talking nonsense." She checked his bandages, still clean, no sign of infection yet. "You kept calling for someone named Rachel." "My sister." Silas looked away. "She died in childbirth 7 years back. Sometimes I forget she's gone." Evelyn knew that feeling. Sometimes she still turned to say something to her mother before remembering the factory cough that had killed her. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She got 19 good years before she met that bastard who got her pregnant and ran off." He shifted, trying to sit up, and went pale. Hell, feel like I've been kicked by a horse. You've been shot and sewn back together with thread meant for buttonholes. You're going to feel worse before you feel better. Evelyn put a hand on his shoulder, keeping him down. Don't tear those stitches or I'll have to do it again, and I'm out of laudanum. Silas settled back with a groan. We need to move. Whitmore's men are probably still looking for me. You can't even sit up without passing out. Moving is out of the question.
Then we're sitting ducks. His jaw tightened. You don't know Whitmore like I do. He doesn't leave loose ends. If his boys didn't find my body in the snow, they'll be back to make sure the job's done. Evelyn had been trying not to think about that. She'd been so focused on keeping Silas alive that she'd pushed aside the bigger problem, that somewhere out there armed men were hunting them. How many men does he have?
At the ranch? Maybe 20 hands total. But the ones who came after me, there were 4 of them. Carson, Dutch, and 2 others I didn't recognize. Silas closed his eyes, remembering. They caught me coming down from the mountain. Carson did the talking, said Whitmore wanted the claim signed over, legal and proper, and if I did it peaceful, they'd let me walk away. You didn't believe him. I've known Carson for 5 years. He's got mean eyes and a quick trigger finger, the kind of man who'd shoot you in the back soon as look at you. Silas's hand drifted to his side, touching the bandages. I ran. Made it maybe 100 yards before Dutch put a bullet in me, left me for dead in the snow. But you didn't die. Spike kept me alive long enough to find this shack. He looked at her. And then you kept me alive the rest of the way. I still can't figure why. Evelyn didn't answer. She wasn't sure she could explain it in a way that made sense. Instead, she got up and went to the window, peering out through the gap in the hide covering. The world outside was blinding white under a hard blue sky. No movement, no tracks in the fresh snow. But that didn't mean they were safe. If they come, she said quietly, what do we do? You run, fast as you can, back to Red Hollow. Tell the sheriff. The sheriff works for Whitmore. Evelyn turned to look at him. Everyone in Red Hollow works for Whitmore one way or another. That's what the man at the mercantile told me. Whitmore owns half the town and holds debts on the other half. Silas cursed under his breath. Then you run somewhere else. Copper Falls is maybe 15 miles south. They've got a federal marshal there who doesn't answer to local money. I'm not leaving you here to die. You saved my life once already. That's more than... I didn't save you so you could throw it away the first time someone comes looking. Evelyn crossed her arms. We survive this together or we don't survive at all. That's the deal. They stared at each other across the tiny shack. Finally, Silas laughed, though it came out more like a cough. You're a stubborn woman, Evelyn Mercer. I've been called worse. The rest of that day passed in tense silence. Evelyn kept watch at the window while Silas slept, waking him every few hours to make sure he was still lucid. Their food was almost gone. 1 piece of jerky left, half a loaf of bread that had gone stale and hard. She'd have to go back to Red Hollow soon, find some way to buy more supplies. But the thought of leaving Silas alone made her stomach clench. As the sun started to set, painting the snow orange and gold, Silas called her over. I need to tell you about the mine, he said, in case something happens to me. Nothing's going to happen to you. Evelyn. He caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. Listen to me. The claim papers are hidden in the mine itself, in a tin box buried under the 3rd support beam from the entrance. If I don't make it, you take those papers and you file them under your own name. The land office is in Helena. That's the territorial capital. You tell them Silas Granger deeded you the claim before he died. Silas? There's more silver in that mountain than you can imagine. Enough to set you up for life. Enough to buy your way into any society you want, scar or no scar. His eyes were fierce. Whitmore thinks he can take it because I'm nobody. But you could be somebody. You could make sure bastards like him don't win. Evelyn pulled her hand back. I don't want your mine. You wanted a new life out west. This is it. He leaned back, exhausted from the effort of talking. Better than marrying some rich rancher who'd treat you like property. That stung because it was true. She'd been ready to marry Caleb Whitmore, to tie herself to a man she'd never met, all for the promise of security. At least Silas was offering her something she'd earn herself. We'll talk about it when you're better, she said. There might not be time for The sound of horses cut him off. Evelyn's blood went cold. She rushed to the window and peered out through the failing light. 3 riders were coming up the trail from Red Hollow, moving slow and careful through the deep snow. Even from a distance, she could see the rifles across their saddles. "They found us," she whispered. Silas tried to sit up and failed. "Help me to my feet." "You can't even stand. How are you going to—" "There's a rifle behind the woodpile. Old Spencer repeater. Might have 3 or 4 rounds left in it." He was struggling to swing his legs off the tarp. "Get me up and get me that gun." Evelyn looked at the approaching riders, then at Silas, then at the door with its leather hinges that wouldn't stop a strong kick. Every survival instinct she had screamed at her to run, to slip out the back and disappear into the trees while the riders were focused on the shack. But she'd made her choice 3 days ago when she pulled a bullet out of a dying stranger. She grabbed Silas under the arms and hauled him upright. He swayed, went gray, but stayed on his feet with her supporting most of his weight. Together they stumbled to the woodpile, and she found the rifle right where he'd said it would be. An old military carbine. The metal pitted with rust, but the action still smooth when she worked it. 4 rounds, Silas confirmed, checking the magazine. "Make them count. I've never shot anyone." "You've never dug a bullet out of someone either, but you managed." He leaned against the wall by the window, the rifle braced on his hip because he didn't have the strength to hold it properly. "When they come through that door, you get behind me and you stay low." The riders were close enough now that Evelyn could make out details. 3 men, all wearing heavy coats and hats pulled low against the cold. The one in front was huge, broad-shouldered, and thick through the middle. The other 2 flanked him, rifles already in their hands. They reined in about 20 yards from the shack. "Silas Granger," the big man called out. His voice carried across the snow like a bell. "I know you're in there. Saw your blood trail leading right to this door." Silas didn't answer. He was breathing hard, his face slick with sweat despite the cold. "Mr. Whitmore wants to talk business," the man continued. "Says he'll give you $500 for the Iron Ridge claim, signed legal and proper. That's more than generous for a played-out hole in the ground." "It's not played out, and we both know it, Carson," Silas finally called back. "Tell Whitmore if he wants the claim, he can go through the proper channels, file a dispute with the land office like everyone else." Carson laughed. "The land office is 3 days' ride from here. You'll be dead of infection in 2. Why don't you make this easy? Sign the papers, take the money, and we'll get you to a real doctor." Evelyn watched the other 2 riders spread out, circling to flank the shack. They were getting into position for an assault, which meant Carson's offer was just talk to keep Silas distracted. "They're not going to let you sign anything," she whispered. "They're going to kill you no matter what you do." Silas knew it too. She could see it in the set of his jaw. "When the shooting starts, you run for the trees. There's a ravine about 50 yards north. You get there and you follow it west. It'll take you down to Copper Falls eventually." "I told you I'm not—" "This ain't up for debate." He looked at her, and there was something like tenderness in his eyes. "You gave me 3 more days I wouldn't have had otherwise. That's a gift. Don't waste it by dying in a shack that's about to become a slaughterhouse." Carson was talking again, still making his fake offers, but Evelyn wasn't listening anymore. She was looking at the back wall of the shack, at the gaps between the logs where the chinking had fallen out, wide enough to squeeze through if she was desperate, wide enough to run. One of the flanking riders had dismounted and was approaching the door, his rifle leveled. The other stayed on his horse, covering the window. "Last chance, Granger," Carson called. "Come out peaceful or we come in hard." Silas raised the Spencer and fired through the window. The shot was deafening in the tiny space. The mounted rider jerked backward and tumbled from his saddle with a scream. His horse bolted, and suddenly everything was chaos. Carson and the other man opened fire, bullets punching through the thin walls like they were paper. Evelyn hit the floor as wood splinters exploded above her head. Silas fired again, working the lever action with shaking hands, and someone outside cursed. "Go!" Silas shouted at her. "Now!" Evelyn scrambled toward the back wall on her hands and knees, her ears ringing from the gunfire. Behind her, she heard Silas fire a 3rd time, heard him grunt with pain as the recoil drove into his wounded side. She reached the gap in the logs and started forcing her way through, the rough wood scraping her face and tearing her coat. The door crashed open just as she squeezed out into the snow. She didn't look back. Couldn't let herself look back. She ran for the trees, her feet slipping and sliding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, the shooting had stopped, replaced by shouting voices. "There's someone else!" Get her! Evelyn hit the tree line and kept running, branches whipping at her face. She could hear pursuit behind her, boots crunching in snow, heavy breathing. She ran harder, her lungs burning, looking desperately for the ravine Silas had mentioned. There, a dark slash in the white landscape, maybe 30 yards ahead. She angled toward it, her legs shaking with effort, and behind her a rifle cracked. The bullet hit a tree to her left, spraying bark. She dove over the edge of the ravine and tumbled down the slope in a chaos of snow and pain. When she finally stopped rolling, she was at the bottom of a narrow cut between two walls of rock, maybe 10 feet deep. Above her, she could hear the rider shouting, "She went into the ravine!" "Forget her," Carson's voice, distant but clear. "We got what we came for. Let the cold take her." Evelyn pressed herself against the rock wall, trying to make herself invisible, trying not to breathe too loud. She heard the horses moving, heard the creak of saddle leather as someone mounted up. Then the sounds faded, heading back toward Red Hollow. She waited in the ravine until full dark, shaking with cold and shock. When she finally climbed back up to the rim, the world was silent except for the wind. The shack was dark. No smoke coming from the chimney, no movement. Evelyn made herself walk back to it even though every instinct screamed to run the other way. The door hung open, riddled with bullet holes. Inside, the fire had gone out. Their few possessions were scattered across the floor, trampled and broken. And Silas was gone. There was blood on the floor where he'd been standing, a lot of it, and drag marks leading out to where the horses had been tied. They'd taken him. Alive or dead, she didn't know, but they'd taken him. Evelyn stood in the ruined shack, staring at those drag marks, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Grief, maybe, or rage. Or just the bitter understanding that she'd failed. She'd tried to save him, and she'd failed. The smart thing would be to keep running. Head for Copper Falls like Silas had told her, tell the federal marshal what had happened, let the law handle it. She had no money, no weapons, no way to fight men like Carson and Dutch. She was just a factory girl with a scarred face who'd been in Montana less than a week, but the law wouldn't help Silas. Not in time. If Whitmore's men had taken him alive, it was only so they could force him to sign over the claim. And once he did, or once they got tired of asking, they'd kill him and bury him somewhere the snow would hide until spring. Evelyn picked up her torn tarp from the floor and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then she started gathering anything useful from the wreckage. A piece of jerky, miraculously intact. 3 matches that hadn't gotten wet. A length of rope. Not much, but it was what she had. She found the Spencer rifle in the corner where Silas had dropped it. Empty now, useless without ammunition, but heavy enough to use as a club if it came to that. The moon was rising as she left the shack and started following the tracks left by the horses. They led south, back toward Red Hollow, clear as a road in the fresh snow. 3 horses going in, 4 coming out, 1 carrying double, which meant Silas was still alive when they left. That gave her hope, small and fragile as a candle flame. The tracks took her past the edge of town, past the dark buildings where people slept safe and warm, and kept going south toward a cluster of lights in the distance. Whitmore's ranch had to be. She'd heard it was the biggest spread in the territory, thousands of acres of prime grazing land that Whitmore had built into an empire. Evelyn stopped at the top of a rise and looked down at the ranch complex below. Main house, big as a hotel. Bunkhouse for the hands. Barn, stables, outbuildings. Lantern light showed in several windows, and she could see movement in the yard. Men walking between buildings, going about their business. Somewhere down there, they were holding Silas. Probably in the barn or one of the outbuildings. Somewhere they could work on him without the household hearing him scream. She had no plan. No weapons worth mentioning, no chance of fighting her way in or out. But she hadn't come this far just to give up and watch Whitmore win. Evelyn started down the slope, moving from shadow to shadow, the rifle clutched in her frozen hands. The ranch dog started barking before she made it halfway, and lights came on in the bunkhouse. "Who's there?" a voice called out. "Show yourself!" She could run, should run, but instead she stepped into the light spilling from the bunkhouse door, the rifle held across her chest like she knew what to do with it. "My name is Evelyn Mercer," she called out, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "I'm here to see Caleb Whitmore." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then men started emerging from the bunkhouse, 6 or 7 of them pulling on coats and boots. One of them was the huge man from the shack, Carson.
He recognized her immediately, his eyes going wide. "You're the woman from... How the hell did you... Take me to Whitmore," Evelyn said. "Now. Or I start shooting, and if this rifle only has one bullet left, I'm putting it right through your skull." It was a bluff. The rifle was empty and they probably knew it. But Carson raised his hands anyway, something like respect flickering across his face. "All right," he said slowly. "All right. Let's not do anything stupid. The boss is in the main house. I'll take you to him." They walked across the yard surrounded by armed men, Evelyn holding the useless rifle like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Maybe it was. The illusion of danger was sometimes as good as the real thing. The main house was even bigger up close. 2 stories of whitewashed wood with a covered porch that wrapped all the way around. Carson knocked on the door, and a moment later it opened to reveal a thin man in an expensive suit. "What's this about?" he demanded. "Carson, why are you—" He saw Evelyn and stopped. "Who is this woman?" "She wants to see Mr. Whitmore." "Mr. Whitmore doesn't take visitors at this hour." "He'll take this one," Evelyn said, pushing past the thin man into a hallway that smelled like cigar smoke and money. "Where is he?" "You can't just—" "Study's at the end of the hall," Carson said quietly. "Miss, I don't know what you think you're doing, but I'm saving a man's life." Evelyn started walking. "Same as I did 3 days ago when you left him for dead." She didn't wait for a response. The study door was closed but not locked. She pushed it open and stepped into a room lined with books and hunting trophies. Deer heads, a bearskin rug, a mountain lion frozen mid-snarl on the wall. And Caleb Whitmore, sitting behind a massive oak desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up when she entered, and for a second he didn't recognize her. Then his eyes narrowed. "You," he said, "the woman with the scar. What are you doing in my house?" "You have Silas Granger." Evelyn walked to the desk, still holding the rifle, even though her arms were shaking from the weight. "I want him released. Now." Caleb set down his whiskey and leaned back in his chair. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your men shot him 5 days ago and left him to die. I saved his life. Then tonight they came back and took him." She met his eyes, refusing to look away. "So stop pretending you don't know. Where is he?" "Even if I did have some mountain rat on my property, why would I give him to you?" "Because if you don't, I'm going to the federal marshal in Copper Falls and telling him everything. About the shooting, about the attempted murder, about you trying to steal a legal mining claim." Caleb laughed. It was the same laugh she'd heard in Red Hollow's street, cruel and dismissive. "The marshal won't believe some scarred vagrant over me. I'm a respected businessman. You're nothing." "I might be nothing," Evelyn agreed. "But Silas Granger isn't. He has claim papers filed in Helena. He has witnesses who can testify that you've been threatening him for months. And if he dies, every federal lawman in the territory is going to start asking questions about who benefits from his death." It was another bluff, and a thin one. But Evelyn had learned something working in the factory. Powerful men were used to people being afraid of them. And sometimes the best weapon was refusing to show fear, even when you felt it eating you from the inside. Caleb studied her for a long moment. "You came all the way down here, walked right into my ranch surrounded by my men, to threaten me over some nobody who isn't even your concern. Why?" "Because someone should have helped me when I needed it," Evelyn said quietly. "And no one did. I'm not letting that happen to someone else." Behind her, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Carson's voice, low and urgent, talking to someone. Then another voice she recognized, and her stomach dropped. Silas stumbled through the door, held upright by Dutch and another man. His face was battered, fresh blood running from a split lip. But he was alive. When he saw Evelyn, his eyes went wide. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded. "I told you to run." "I don't take orders well," Evelyn said. Then to Caleb, "Let him go." "Or what? You'll shoot me with that empty rifle?" Caleb stood up, walking around the desk. "Carson told me you pulled a bullet out of this fool and stitched him up in that shack. That took guts. Stupid guts, but guts nonetheless." He stopped a few feet away, looking her up and down. "You know what I think? I think you're tougher than you look, which gives me an idea." Evelyn's grip tightened on the rifle. "What idea?" "The mining claim is worth maybe $200,000 if the silver runs as deep as Granger claims." "That's a lot of money." Caleb circled her slowly, like a buyer examining livestock. But I'm a businessman. I don't like loose ends or federal marshals asking questions. So here's my offer. You convince Granger to sign over the claim voluntarily, right here and now, and I'll give you both $5,000 and safe passage out of Montana, enough to start over somewhere else. Don't listen to him, Silas said. His voice was rough, strained. He'll kill us both the second I sign. Actually, I won't. Caleb returned to his desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. Because Miss Mercer is going to sign a document stating that the transfer was voluntary and legal, and that you're leaving the territory of your own free will. Then she's going to take that document to the federal marshal herself and confirm the story. He looked at Evelyn. With her as a witness, there's no crime, just a simple business transaction between civilized people. It was clever. Evelyn had to give him that. By making her complicit, Whitmore protected himself from any future accusations, and $5,000 was more money than she'd see in 10 lifetimes of factory work. And if I refuse, she asked, then I kill Granger right now, in front of you, and have Carson bury you both somewhere the wolves will find you before spring. Caleb's voice was pleasant, conversational. Your choice. Evelyn looked at Silas. His face was beaten to hell, but his eyes were clear and fierce. He gave a tiny shake of his head. She thought about the marriage contract torn up in the street, about the door closing in her face at the boarding house, about every time in her life someone had told her she was worthless, that her scar made her less than human, that she should be grateful for scraps. She thought about the mine, hidden in Iron Ridge, worth a fortune that men would kill for. And then she lowered the rifle. All right, she said quietly. We'll sign. Evelyn, no. Silas lurched forward, or tried to, but Dutch yanked him back hard enough that he gasped in pain. Don't do this. Shut him up, Caleb said mildly, and Carson backhanded Silas across the face. The sound echoed in the study like a gunshot. Evelyn flinched but didn't move. She kept her eyes on Caleb, on the papers he was laying out on his desk with such casual confidence. Her mind was racing, looking for the angle, the way out. There had to be one. There was always one if you looked hard enough. You'll need to witness his signature, Caleb said, dipping a pen in ink and holding it out to her. Make sure he signs his full legal name, Silas Theodore Granger, according to the claim registry. Theodore, Evelyn said softly, looking at Silas. Blood was running from his nose now, dripping onto the expensive rug. You never told me your middle name. Wasn't relevant, Silas muttered through split lips. Caleb set the pen down on the desk. Bring him here. Dutch and the other man dragged Silas forward and shoved him into a chair. He slumped there, breathing hard, one hand pressed to his wounded side. The bandages Evelyn had wrapped so carefully were soaked through with fresh blood. Sign, Caleb said, pushing the paper toward him. Silas looked at the document, then at Evelyn. She could see the question in his eyes, the confusion. She told him she wouldn't abandon him, and here she was doing exactly that, selling him out for $5,000, and a promise from a man who'd already proven his word was worthless. Except she'd also told him she didn't take orders well. Before he signs, Evelyn said, I want to see the money. Caleb raised an eyebrow. You don't trust me. You tore up a legal marriage contract in front of half the town and called me disfigured. No, Mr. Whitmore, I don't trust you as far as I could throw you. Something flickered across Caleb's face, surprise maybe, or grudging respect. Fair enough. He walked to a large safe in the corner and worked the combination. When he pulled the door open, Evelyn saw stacks of bills inside, more money than she'd imagined existed in one place. He counted out $5,000 in hundreds, laying the bills on the desk in neat stacks. Satisfied? Almost. Evelyn picked up one of the bills and held it to the lamplight, pretending to check if it was real. She had no idea what a counterfeit bill looked like, but Caleb didn't need to know that. And the horses you promised for our safe passage? I never promised horses. Then I'm promising myself horses. Evelyn set the bill down. 2 of them, with saddles and enough supplies to get us to the border, or the deal's off. Caleb's jaw tightened. You're pushing your luck, Miss Mercer. My luck ran out the day I stepped off the stage in Red Hollow. She crossed her arms. 2 horses. That's the price for my cooperation. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Caleb laughed, short and sharp. You've got spine, I'll give you that. Fine. 2 horses, saddles, supplies. Carson, see to it.
Carson nodded and left the room. Dutch and his companion stayed, flanking Silas, their hands resting on their gun belts. "Now then," Caleb said, turning back to Silas. "Sign the damn paper." Silas picked up the pen. His hand was shaking badly, and Evelyn couldn't tell if it was from pain or rage or both. He stared at the document for a long moment. "That mine is worth $200,000, he said quietly. "Maybe more. You're stealing it for $5,000 and calling it a fair deal." "I'm letting you live," Caleb corrected. "That's the deal. Sign or die. Simple choice." The pen hovered over the paper. Evelyn watched Silas's face, saw the moment he made his decision. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'm sorry, Rachel," he whispered, so quiet Evelyn almost didn't hear it. Then he signed his name in a shaky scrawl. Caleb snatched the paper up before the ink was dry, examining the signature with a satisfied smile. "Excellent. Miss Mercer, if you'll add your witness signature here, let him go first." "Excuse me? You have what you want. Let him go, then I'll sign." Evelyn met Caleb's eyes. "Otherwise, how do I know you won't just shoot us both the second I put pen to paper?" Caleb's smile widened. "You really don't trust anyone, do you?" "I trusted you once. Look where that got me." He laughed at that, genuine amusement in his voice. "All right, Dutch, take him outside, get him cleaned up, and put him on one of those horses Carson's saddling." "Boss, are you sure?" "Do it." Dutch hauled Silas to his feet and half carried him toward the door. As they passed, Silas caught Evelyn's arm. "Don't sign that paper," he said urgently. "Whatever you're planning, it's not worth dying for." "Who says I'm planning anything?" Evelyn pulled free gently. "Go on, I'll be right behind you." Silas looked like he wanted to argue, but Dutch was already dragging him into the hallway. The door closed behind them, leaving Evelyn alone with Caleb and one guard. "Smart woman," Caleb said, offering her the pen. "You know when to fold a losing hand." Evelyn took the pen and looked at the paper. The transfer of claim form, signed by Silas Theodore Granger, witnessed by... She paused, the pen hovering over the line. "Something wrong?" Caleb asked. "Just thinking about what my signature is worth." She set the pen down. "Actually, Mr. Whitmore, I've changed my mind." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Caleb's smile vanished. "What did you say?" "I said I changed my mind. I'm not signing." Evelyn stepped back from the desk. "Silas signed under duress, which makes the document invalid. Any judge would throw it out in 5 minutes. You need my signature to make it look legitimate, and you're not getting it." "Then you're a dead woman." Caleb's hand moved toward the gun on his hip. "Maybe. But so are you." Evelyn pulled something from her coat pocket, the torn halves of the marriage contract, the one she'd picked up from the street in Red Hollow. "I kept these. And I'm going to tell everyone who will listen how Caleb Whitmore brought a woman all the way from Pennsylvania on false pretenses, humiliated her publicly, then left her to die in a blizzard. You think your reputation can survive that? The great Caleb Whitmore, respected businessman, terrorizing women and stealing from dying men. All at what each boom. No one will care about some factory girl with a scar." "You're right. They won't care about me." Evelyn took another step toward the door. "But they'll care about you. Because if you can do this to me, you can do it to anyone. Every rancher who owes you money, every merchant who depends on your business, they'll all start wondering when you're going to turn on them next." It was a desperate gamble, all bluff and no substance. But she saw something flicker in Caleb's eyes. Not fear exactly, but calculation. "You think you're clever," he said slowly, "but you're forgetting something. I have your mountain man, and I have a dozen men who'll swear he signed that paper willingly. Your word against all of ours." "True." Evelyn reached the door and put her hand on the knob. "But I've got nothing to lose. You've got everything. Let's see who blinks first." She yanked the door open and ran. Behind her, Caleb shouted for the guard. Footsteps pounded after her as she sprinted down the hallway, through the front door, out into the cold night air. The yard was chaos. Men running, horses stamping, someone yelling about the woman from the study. Evelyn saw Silas near the barn, already mounted on a black gelding, holding the reins of a second horse. His face was pale as death, but his eyes were alert. "Ride!" she screamed at him. He kicked his horse into motion, the second horse following on a lead rope. Evelyn ran to meet them, her lungs burning, and Silas leaned down, arm extended. "Grab on!" She caught his hand and he hauled her up behind him with strength she didn't know he had left. Then they were moving, the horses stretching into a gallop, snow flying up from their hooves. Gunshots cracked behind them. Evelyn ducked low, pressing herself against Silas's back, feeling him shudder with each labored breath. The ranch fell away behind them as they plunged into the darkness, following the road north toward the mountains. They rode hard for maybe 10 minutes before Silas slumped forward over the horse's neck. "I can't," he gasped. "Evelyn, I can't." She grabbed the reins from his weakening grip and pulled both horses to a stop. Silas slid sideways and she barely caught him, easing him down into the snow. His shirt was soaked with blood, the stitches torn open from the beating and the ride. "Stay with me," she said, her hands already moving to check the wound. It was worse than before, bleeding freely, and she had no supplies to stop it. Nothing but snow and darkness and the sound of pursuit getting closer. "Leave me," Silas mumbled. "Take the horse and go." "Shut up." Evelyn looked around desperately. They were at the base of Iron Ridge, the mountain rising dark against the stars. "Where's the mine? How do I find it?" "North face. Look for the lightning-struck pine." His eyes were drifting closed. "Follow the creek bed up, about half a mile. You'll see the entrance." "Can you ride if I get you back on the horse?" "No, can't even stand." He grabbed her wrist with bloody fingers. "The claim papers. In the tin box. Under the third beam. You take them, and you run." "I'm not leaving you here to—" "They're coming." Silas's grip tightened. "You hear that? They're coming, and I'm dead weight. If you stay, we both die. If you go, at least one of us lives." Evelyn could hear it now. Horses. Lots of them. Moving fast through the night. Maybe 5 minutes away, maybe less. She looked at Silas, bleeding and broken in the snow. Looked at the mountain looming above them. Looked at the two horses, stamping nervously, ready to run. "I hate you for this," she said. "I know." Silas smiled, blood on his teeth. "But you'll survive. You're tough. Tougher than me." Evelyn stood up, her whole body shaking. She grabbed the reins of both horses and started leading them toward the north face of the mountain. Behind her, Silas called out weakly, "Evelyn, thank you for everything." She didn't answer, couldn't answer. If she tried to speak, she'd start screaming and never stop. The lightning-struck pine was right where Silas said it would be, a massive ponderosa split down the middle by some long-ago storm. Past it, a frozen creek bed led upward into the darkness. Evelyn tied the horses to a branch and started climbing, using her hands as much as her feet on the icy rocks. The mine entrance was a black hole in the mountainside, maybe 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, shored up with ancient timbers. Evelyn ducked inside, and the darkness swallowed her completely. She felt her way forward, hands on the rough stone walls, feet sliding on the uneven floor. Somewhere behind her she heard gunshots, 2, 3, 4 in rapid succession. Then silence. Silas was dead. She knew it the way you know the sun will rise. They'd found him and finished what they started, and she was alone in the dark with killers hunting her. Evelyn kept moving deeper into the mine, counting her steps. At 50, she stopped and felt around for the support beam Silas had mentioned. Her fingers found rough-hewn wood, and she started counting. First beam, second beam, third beam. She knelt and started digging in the dirt at its base, her nails breaking, her hands going numb from cold. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, her fingers hit something metal. The tin box was smaller than she expected, maybe the size of a cigar box, rusted shut from years underground. She pried it open and felt inside, finding folded papers stiff with age and moisture. Outside the mine, she heard voices. "Tracks lead right up to that pine tree. Check the mine entrance." Evelyn shoved the papers inside her coat and looked around frantically. The mine continued deeper into the mountain, but she had no light, no way to navigate. If she went in there, she'd get lost in the dark and die of cold before morning. But if she stayed here, they'd find her in seconds. She went deeper. The tunnel sloped downward, twisting and turning, branching off in directions she couldn't see. Evelyn kept one hand on the wall and moved as fast as she dared, her other hand pressed to her coat to keep the papers from rustling. Behind her, lamplight began to glow at the entrance. "She's in here!" someone shouted. "I can see fresh tracks!" The light grew brighter. Evelyn ran, stumbling over rocks and debris, the darkness absolute. Her foot caught on something and she went down hard, sliding several feet before catching herself. She'd fallen into some kind of side passage, narrow and low. She crawled into it, pulling herself forward on her elbows. The passage got smaller, tighter, until she had to exhale completely just to squeeze through. But it went deep, back into the mountain, and the lamplight couldn't reach this far. She heard them searching the main tunnel, their voices echoing strangely in the enclosed space. See anything? Nothing. Too many passages. She could be anywhere. Whitmore wants her alive if possible. Says she's got papers he needs. How long do we search? Until we find her, or until she freezes to death. Either way, she's not leaving this mountain. Evelyn pressed herself against the cold stone and tried not to breathe. The papers crinkled slightly against her chest, and she froze, terrified the sound would carry. But the men kept talking, their voices moving away, searching other passages. She waited in the dark for what felt like hours. The cold was seeping into her bones, making her drowsy. She knew that was dangerous, knew if she fell asleep in here she'd never wake up. But her body was shutting down, exhausted past the point of functioning. She thought about Silas, dying in the snow outside, about her mother, coughing blood into a handkerchief in their Philadelphia tenement, about Caleb Whitmore, sitting in his warm study, certain he'd won. She couldn't let him win. Wouldn't let him win. Evelyn forced herself to move, crawling forward through the narrow passage. It opened up eventually into a larger chamber, and she could stand again, hunched over but mobile. She felt her way along the wall until she found another passage leading upward. The air changed as she climbed, less stale, less dead. She was getting close to another opening, had to be. She moved faster, hope giving her strength she shouldn't have had left. The passage ended in a jumble of rocks, a cave-in, old but complete, blocking the way forward. Evelyn wanted to scream. She'd come all this way only to hit a dead end. But wait. Air was coming through the rocks, cold and fresh. There was a gap up near the ceiling, maybe big enough to squeeze through if she could climb high enough. She started pulling herself up the rock pile, her hands raw and bleeding, her breath coming in short gasps. Halfway up, a rock shifted under her weight, and she nearly fell, sending a cascade of smaller stones clattering down. "Did you hear that?" A voice, distant but clear. They were coming back. Evelyn climbed faster, desperation giving her speed. She reached the gap and shoved herself through, feeling the rocks scrape her back, her ribs, tearing her coat. For one terrible moment, she was stuck, wedged between stone and more stone, unable to move forward or back. Then something gave and she tumbled through, landing in snow so cold it burned. She was outside, on the mountain, maybe 200 feet above the mine entrance, in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees. The moon had risen, painting everything silver and black, and standing at the edge of the clearing holding a lantern was Carson. They stared at each other for a frozen moment. Then Carson reached for his gun. Evelyn threw a rock at him, hard and desperate. It hit his shoulder, and the lantern dropped, rolling through the snow, the light spinning crazily. Carson cursed and drew his pistol, but Evelyn was already running, crashing through the trees. The gunshot was deafening in the quiet night. The bullet hit a tree trunk 6 inches from her head, spraying splinters. She ran harder, her lungs screaming, branches whipping her face. More shots. One burned across her upper arm, hot and sharp, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The ground disappeared beneath her feet without warning. She was falling, tumbling down a steep slope in an avalanche of snow and rocks and pain. She hit something hard and everything went white. When the world came back into focus, Evelyn was lying at the bottom of a ravine. The same ravine she'd hidden in before, she realized, when she'd escaped from the shack. She'd come full circle. Everything hurt. Her arm was bleeding where the bullet had grazed it. Her ribs felt broken, or at least cracked. But she was alive, and she still had the papers tucked inside her coat. Above her, she could hear Carson shouting, calling for the others. They'd be coming down after her soon. She had maybe minutes to move. Evelyn dragged herself to her feet and started following the ravine west, the way Silas had told her, toward Copper Falls, toward help. She walked through the rest of that night in a haze of pain and cold. The ravine protected her from the worst of the wind, but it also trapped the cold, turning her breath to ice in her lungs. Twice she fell and couldn't get up for long minutes. Once she was certain she heard horses behind her, and she hid under an overhang until the sound passed. Dawn found her still walking, though she couldn't feel her feet anymore, and her arm had gone numb where the bullet had clipped it. The ravine was widening, becoming a valley, and she could see buildings in the distance. Copper Falls. She tried to walk faster, and her legs gave out. She went down hard in the snow and couldn't get up this time. Her body had finally hit its limit.
This is it, she thought distantly. This is where I die. In the snow, 15 miles from nowhere, holding papers I'll never get to file. But then there were voices, real ones this time, not hallucinations. Hands lifting her, carrying her, someone asking her name, asking what happened. Evelyn, she managed to whisper. Evelyn Mercer, need federal marshal. We'll get you to a doctor first, miss. You're bleeding pretty bad.
No, Marshal, have to... Tell him. Her hand clutched at her coat, at the papers inside. Have to... Then the darkness rose up and took her, and she knew nothing else. She woke in a bed, warm for the first time in days. Sunlight was streaming through a window, and a woman in a white apron was changing bandages on her arm. Welcome back, the woman said when she saw Evelyn's eyes open. You've been out for 2 days. Gave us quite a scare. Evelyn tried to sit up and pain lanced through her ribs. The papers, where are... Safe. The marshal has them. The woman gently pushed her back down. He's been waiting to talk to you. I'll let him know you're awake. The marshal turned out to be a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a badge that said U.S. Federal Marshal. He pulled up a chair beside the bed and set a tin box on the nightstand, the same box Evelyn had dug up from the mine. Miss Mercer, he said, I'm Marshal Hendricks. The doctor says you're lucky to be alive. Silas Granger, Evelyn said immediately. Did you find... We found his body yesterday morning, about 8 miles north of here, shot multiple times. Hendricks' expression was grim. I'm sorry. Evelyn closed her eyes. She'd known, but hearing it confirmed still hit like a fist to the gut. Caleb Whitmore killed him, or had him killed. That's a serious accusation. I have proof. Evelyn opened her eyes and looked at the tin box. The claim papers in there show Silas owned the Iron Ridge silver mine legally. Whitmore wanted it, tried to force Silas to sign it over. When he refused, they shot him. I've reviewed the papers, Hendricks said carefully. They appear legitimate, but there's a problem. This morning, a man named Caleb Whitmore arrived in Copper Falls with his lawyer and a signed transfer document. Claims Silas Granger sold him the mine voluntarily for $5,000. Witnessed by you. Evelyn's blood went cold. That's a lie. The signature was coerced. I was there, I saw it. I believe you, Miss Mercer. Hendricks held up a hand. But it's going to be your word against his in front of a territorial judge. And Whitmore's got money for expensive lawyers. Then what do I do? You tell me everything that happened, every detail, and I'll build a case that even expensive lawyers can't knock down. He pulled out a notebook. Start from the beginning. When did you first meet Silas Granger?
Evelyn talked for hours, telling him everything. The blizzard, the shack, digging the bullet out of Silas's side. The attack by Carson and his men, the confrontation at Whitmore's ranch, the escape, and Silas's death. Hendricks wrote it all down, asking questions, clarifying details. When she finished, he sat back and studied his notes.
This is enough for an investigation, he said finally. Maybe even enough for an arrest warrant, but it's going to take time. Whitmore's got friends in the territorial government. This won't be quick or easy. How much time? Months, maybe. We'll need to interview witnesses, gather evidence, build an airtight case. He looked at her seriously. In the meantime, you need to stay safe. If Whitmore thinks you're a threat, he already knows I'm a threat. He's known since I walked out of his study with those claim papers. Hendricks nodded slowly. Then we keep you here under protection until the trial. No. Evelyn pushed herself upright despite the pain. I'm not hiding while Whitmore runs free. There has to be something else. Like what? She thought about it, her mind racing. Silas said the mine was worth hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. If I could prove that, prove there's enough money at stake to kill for, it strengthens the motive. You want to go back to that mine? I want to file the claim in my name, Evelyn said. Silas told me to, if anything happened to him. Said he had no family, no one to leave it to. The claim papers list him as sole owner. If he's dead and I file as his heir and... You're not his heir. You have no legal relationship to him. But he wanted me to have it. That has to count for something.
Hendricks looked at her for a long moment. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Mercer." "I've been called both." Evelyn met his eyes. "What do I need to do to file that claim?"
You need to go to Helena, to the Territorial Land Office. Present the original claim papers and Granger's death certificate. Then file a new claim as the discoverer of record, since the original claimant is deceased. He paused. "But Whitmore's going to fight it. He'll say Granger sold him the claim before he died."
"Then I'll fight back." Evelyn's hand found the papers in the tin box, touching them like a talisman. "I didn't pull a bullet out of that man and watch him die just to let Whitmore steal what he died protecting." The marshal stood up, pocketing his notebook. "I'll arrange an escort to Helena. It's a 3-day ride, and if Whitmore figures out what you're doing, he'll send his men after me. I know." Evelyn lay back against the pillows, exhausted but determined. "Let him try."
Marshal Hendricks left 2 deputies outside Evelyn's room that night, and she heard them take up position in the hallway with the kind of heavy footsteps meant to reassure. But reassurance was hard to come by when every shadow looked like a man with a gun, and every creaking floorboard sounded like someone coming to finish what Carson had started. She didn't sleep, just lay there staring at the ceiling, running through everything that had happened, trying to find the mistakes she'd made. Maybe she should have let Silas die in the snow outside that shack. Maybe she should have taken the $5,000 and run. Maybe she should have never gotten on that stage in Philadelphia in the first place. But regret didn't change anything. Silas was still dead, and she was still alive. And somewhere out there, Caleb Whitmore was planning his next move. The doctor cleared her for travel 2 days later, though he made it plain he thought she was crazy. "Those ribs need another week at least," he said, wrapping them tight with clean bandages. "And that arm wound could still get infected if you're not careful."
"I'll be careful," Evelyn lied.
Hendricks had arranged for a wagon rather than horses, which was both a mercy and an insult. Evelyn couldn't have ridden horseback if her life depended on it, but sitting in a wagon like an invalid made her feel weak. Still, she climbed onto the bench beside the driver without complaint and tucked the tin box containing Silas's claim papers under her coat. The escort was 4 men, 2 deputies riding ahead, 2 behind. All of them looked young and nervous, which didn't inspire confidence. But they had rifles and knew how to use them, and that would have to be enough. 3 days to Helena if the weather holds, the driver said. He was an older man with a face like cracked leather and hands that never left the reins. "Might be 4 if we hit snow in the passes." "Let's hope for 3, Evelyn said. They made good time the first day, following the main road through pine forests and frozen meadows. Evelyn watched the landscape roll by and tried not to think about what waited in Helena. The land office, the lawyers, the fight that was coming. She'd never been in a courtroom, never faced down anyone more powerful than a factory foreman. But she'd also never dug a bullet out of a dying man or escaped from a mine full of killers, and she'd managed those. They stopped for the night at a way station, a rough building that served as both trading post and inn. The owner was a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who took one look at Evelyn's scarred face and bruised body and asked no questions, just pointed her to a room in the back. "You'll want to bar the door," Mrs. Patterson said, handing her a key. "We get all kinds through here." Evelyn barred it and slept with her boots on, the tin box clutched to her chest. Outside, she could hear the deputies taking turns on watch, their low voices carrying through the thin walls. The second day was harder. The road climbed into the mountains, switching back on itself through passes where the snow lay thick and treacherous. Twice the wagon got stuck and everyone had to climb down and push, Evelyn included despite the protests. She couldn't just sit there while others did the work. They were maybe an hour from the next way station when the driver pulled up short. "What is it?" one of the deputies called from ahead. "Tree across the road," the driver pointed with his whip. "Looks fresh fallen." Evelyn felt her stomach drop. She'd heard enough stories about road agents to know what a fallen tree usually meant. "It's not fallen," she said quietly. "It's been cut." The deputies realized it at the same time. They started reaching for their rifles, but it was already too late. Men rose up from behind rocks on both sides of the road, maybe 8 or 10 of them, all armed. "Nobody move!" one of them shouted. He was tall and lean, with a face Evelyn didn't recognize. Not Carson or Dutch, but cut from the same cloth. "You're all going to step down slow and keep your hands where we can see them." The deputies looked at each other, calculating odds. 4 against 10 was suicide, and they knew it. One by one they dismounted, hands raised. You too, lady, the tall man said, gesturing at Evelyn with his rifle. Down from the wagon. Evelyn climbed down, moving carefully so the tin box stayed hidden under her coat. Her ribs screamed in protest, but she kept her face blank. This is a federal escort, she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. You're interfering with— I know exactly what I'm interfering with, Miss Mercer. The tall man walked closer, his rifle pointed casually at her chest. Mr. Whitmore sends his regards, says you've got something that belongs to him. I don't have anything of his. The claim papers. Hand them over and we'll let you walk away from this. Resist and things get messy. One of the deputies, the youngest one, started to move. You can't just— The tall man shot him. Just like that, no warning, the rifle cracking sharp in the cold air. The deputy went down with a hole in his chest and didn't move again. Evelyn heard someone screaming and realized it was her. The other deputies were shouting, reaching for their weapons, but more shots rang out and 2 more men fell. The 4th deputy managed to get his rifle up and fired, hitting one of the road agents in the shoulder before someone shot him in the head. Then it was quiet, except for the ringing in Evelyn's ears and the sound of her own ragged breathing. 4 men dead in the span of maybe 10 seconds. The driver was on his knees in the snow, hands up, begging for his life. Please, he was saying, please, I got grandchildren, I'm just trying to— They shot him too. Evelyn stood frozen, unable to move, unable to think. The tall man walked over and grabbed her coat, ripping it open. The tin box fell out and hit the ground. There we go, he said, bending to pick it up. That wasn't so hard, was it? You killed them. Evelyn's voice didn't sound like her own. You killed them. Had to make a point. He tucked the tin box under his arm. Can't have people thinking they can interfere with Mr. Whitmore's business and walk away clean. What about me? The words came out flat, emotionless. She was already dead. Had to be. This couldn't be real. You? The tall man considered. Mr. Whitmore said to bring you back if possible. Wants to talk to you before he decides what to do. But if you give us trouble— He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. Evelyn looked at the bodies scattered in the snow, at the blood turning the white ground red, and nodded slowly. I won't give you trouble. They tied her hands and put her on one of the dead deputies' horses. Then they rode north, away from the road, into country Evelyn didn't recognize. The tall man kept the tin box, checking it periodically like he was afraid it might disappear. Evelyn rode in silence and tried to think. The papers were gone. The deputies were dead. No one knew where she was, except the men who'd taken her, and they worked for Whitmore. By the time anyone found the bodies and started asking questions, she'd be long dead and buried somewhere the wolves would scatter her bones. But she wasn't dead yet, and as long as she was breathing, there was still a chance. They rode until dark and made camp in a shallow canyon that blocked the wind. The men built a fire and posted guards while the rest ate jerky and hardtack. No one offered Evelyn any food, though one of them brought her water after the tall man— she'd heard the others call him Reed— told him to. Don't want you dying of thirst before we get back, Reed said. Mr. Whitmore was very specific about that. Whitmore can go to hell, Evelyn said. Reed backhanded her across the face, casual as swatting a fly. Watch your mouth. I've got orders to bring you back alive, but that doesn't mean I can't make the trip unpleasant. Evelyn tasted blood where her lip had split against her teeth. She didn't say anything else. That night they tied her to a tree away from the fire. Her hands were numb from the ropes and her ribs felt like they were grinding against each other with every breath. She could hear the men talking and laughing around the fire, passing a bottle back and forth, bragging about the ambush. Did you see that one kid's face when Reed shot his partner? One of them said. Thought he was going to piss himself. Should have let him. Would have been funny. More laughter. Evelyn closed her eyes and tried not to listen. Tried not to think about the deputies who'd died trying to protect her. Young men with families, with futures, cut down because Caleb Whitmore wanted a silver mine. She must have dozed off because she woke to someone shaking her shoulder. It was still dark. The fire burned down to embers. One of the guards stood over her, a nervous-looking man with a patchy beard. You awake? He whispered. Evelyn nodded, confused. Listen close. I'm going to untie you and you're going to run. There's a creek about 200 yards that way. He pointed into the darkness. Follow it east and you'll hit the main road by morning. Why are you— Because I didn't sign up to kill federal deputies. His hands were already working at the ropes. Reed's crazy, and Whitmore's worse. I want no part of what's coming. The ropes fell away and feelings started coming back to Evelyn's hands in painful pins and needles. They'll know you let me go. I'll say you got loose somehow. Now go before I change my mind. Evelyn didn't argue. She ran into the darkness, her ribs screaming, her hands useless from the ropes. Behind her, she heard the guard call out in fake alarm. She's loose! The woman's loose! Shouts erupted from the camp. Someone fired a shot, but it went wide, hitting nothing. Evelyn kept running, crashed through brush she couldn't see, fell twice and dragged herself back up. She found the creek by sound more than sight, and followed it east like the guard had told her. She could hear pursuit behind her, men thrashing through the undergrowth, cursing. But the darkness was her ally now. They had to be careful with their lanterns or risk giving away their position. She just had to run. The creek led her down into a narrow gorge, the water frozen solid beneath a skim of snow. Evelyn followed it for what felt like hours, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her body running on nothing but desperation. Several times she heard the men close by, their voices echoing off the gorge walls, but they never spotted her. Dawn was breaking when she finally stumbled out onto the main road. She stood there swaying, trying to decide which direction to go, when she heard hoofbeats. A single rider was coming from the south, moving fast. Evelyn almost ran back into the trees, thinking it was one of Reed's men, but then she saw the badge pinned to his coat. Marshal Hendricks reined in hard when he saw her. "Miss Mercer, what in the name of... where's the escort?" "Dead." Evelyn's legs gave out and she sat down hard in the road. "Reed and his men ambushed us, killed everyone, took the claim papers." Hendricks was off his horse in seconds, kneeling beside her. "How many men?" 10, maybe. They took me north, but I escaped. The guard let me go. I don't know why." She was babbling now, the words spilling out. "They're still looking for me. Reed said Whitmore wants me alive. I'm getting you out of here." Hendricks lifted her onto his horse like she weighed nothing. "Can you ride?" "I don't have a choice." He swung up behind her and kicked the horse into a gallop. They rode hard for an hour before he finally slowed, checking over his shoulder for pursuit. Nothing but empty road behind them. "I heard about the ambush from a trapper heading south," Hendricks said. "Found the bodies this morning. I was tracking you when you stumbled onto the road. The papers are gone. Reed has them. Papers can be replaced. You can't." He urged the horse into a trot. "We're going straight to Helena. No more stops, no more way stations. Whitmore thinks he's won, and that gives us an advantage." "What advantage?" "He has everything. The mine, the papers. The witness is dead. He has papers that prove Silas Granger owned a mine. But he doesn't have you." Hendricks glanced back at her. "You were there, Miss Mercer. You witnessed everything. That makes you evidence Whitmore can't destroy. He's trying hard enough. Which tells me we're on to something bigger than just a mining claim." Hendricks kept scanning the road ahead, his hand never far from his gun. "When we get to Helena, you're going straight to the territorial governor. Tell him everything, on the record. Once your testimony is official, killing you becomes worthless. The damage is already done." Evelyn wanted to believe him, but she'd seen what Whitmore was capable of, seen the bodies in the snow, and she knew men like that didn't care about official records or territories. They only cared about winning. They reached Helena 2 days later, both of them exhausted and half frozen. The territorial capital was bigger than Red Hollow, bigger than Copper Falls, a real city with brick buildings and paved streets, and people who looked at Evelyn's scarred face with only passing interest. Hendricks took her straight to the governor's office, an imposing building near the center of town. A clerk tried to turn them away, but Hendricks showed his badge and pushed past. "I need to see Governor Harrison. Federal matter." "The governor is in a meeting. Get him out of it." The clerk took one look at Hendricks' face and disappeared through a side door. 5 minutes later, he returned with a portly man in an expensive suit who looked annoyed until he saw Evelyn. "What happened to this woman?" "Ambush on the Helena Road," Hendricks said. 4 federal deputies murdered, mining claim theft, attempted kidnapping, and it all leads back to Caleb Whitmore." The governor's expression changed. "That's a serious accusation, Marshal." "I have serious evidence starting with Miss Mercer's testimony." Hendricks guided Evelyn to a chair. "Tell him what you told me. Everything." So Evelyn talked. Again.
The whole story from beginning to end, every detail she could remember.
The governor listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each new revelation. When she finished, he sat back and exhaled slowly. If even half of what you're saying is true, this is the biggest scandal Montana Territory has seen in a decade. It's all true, Evelyn said. Every word. The problem is proof. The governor steepled his fingers. Whitmore has the claim papers now. He'll file them under his own name and swear up and down that Granger sold them to him willingly. Your testimony helps, but juries don't trust women with scars, Evelyn finished bitterly, especially when they're going up against rich men. I wasn't going to put it quite that way, but the governor shrugged. You understand the difficulty. What if we could prove the mine is worth what Silas claimed? Hendricks leaned forward. 200,000, maybe more. That establishes motive for murder. You'd need an independent assay, and even then, it only proves the mine is valuable, not that Whitmore killed for it. Evelyn thought about the mine, the dark tunnels where she'd almost died. I can take you there, show you exactly where Silas said the silver runs deepest. If we bring in a mining engineer,
that could take weeks, the governor interrupted. And in the meantime, Whitmore will have filed his claim and taken possession. The longer we wait, the harder this becomes. Then what do we do? Evelyn felt the last of her hope starting to crack. Let him win? The governor and Hendricks exchanged a look. Then the governor stood and walked to his window, staring out at the city below. There might be another way, he said slowly. Whitmore's planning to file the claim tomorrow morning at the land office. I know because his lawyer sent a courtesy notice to my office, crowing about his client's new acquisition. So we stop him from filing, Hendricks said. We can't. He has the papers, and they appear legitimate. The governor turned back to face them. But what if Miss Mercer files first? Evelyn blinked. How? Reed has the claim papers. The original papers, yes. But Silas Granger's claim was registered 3 years ago. The land office has copies in their files. The governor smiled slightly. As the only surviving witness to Granger's death, you could file a new claim on the same land, citing the original claim as precedent. It won't be as strong as having the originals, but it'll tie up the land in legal disputes for months, long enough for us to build a case against Whitmore. He'll fight it, Evelyn said. Of course he will, but he'll have to do it in court, in front of a judge, with lawyers arguing over every detail. And while that's happening, we investigate. Talk to people in Red Hollow who've been afraid to speak up. Look into his other business dealings. Men like Whitmore don't commit just one crime. They commit dozens, and eventually we'll find the one that sticks. Hendricks nodded slowly. It could work, if we move fast. How fast? Evelyn asked. The land office opens at 8 tomorrow morning. Whitmore's appointment is at 9. The governor checked his pocket watch. That gives you less than 12 hours to prepare your claim. Evelyn looked at her hands, still rope-burned and bleeding, looked at her torn coat, her mud-stained dress, the face she knew was bruised and scarred. She looked like exactly what she was. A factory girl who'd stumbled into something bigger than herself and somehow survived. What do I need to do? She asked. The governor called in his clerk and started issuing orders. Within an hour, Evelyn was sitting in a lawyer's office, answering questions while a bespectacled man took notes and drew up documents. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Chen, no relation to the boarding house owner, listened to Evelyn's story and asked questions that cut right to the heart of things. You have no legal relationship to Silas Granger, Mrs. Chen said. No marriage, no business partnership, no written agreement. That makes your claim to his mine tenuous at best. He told me to take it if he died. That has to count for something. It counts as hearsay. A good lawyer will tear it apart in minutes. Mrs. Chen tapped her pen against the desk. We need something stronger. Did Granger give you anything? A letter? A token? Anything physical that proves his intent? Evelyn thought back to those last moments in the snow, Silas bleeding and dying while she held his hand. He'd given her nothing but words and hope. No, she said quietly. Nothing. Then we argue right of discovery. You found the mine, you saved the original claimant's life, you were the last person he spoke to before his death. It's weak, but it's all we have. Mrs. Chen started writing again, her pen scratching across the paper. The judge will probably rule against you eventually, but it'll take time. Months,
maybe a year if we're lucky. And if Whitmore's lawyer is better than you? Whitmore's lawyer is absolutely better than me. Thornton Reed, no relation to the man who kidnapped you, is the best legal mind in the territory. He charges $50 an hour and wins 90% of his cases. Mrs. Chen looked up and smiled grimly. But I work for free when I think someone's getting cheated. And I hate men like Caleb Whitmore more than I like money. By midnight, the papers were ready. Evelyn read through them twice, understanding maybe half the legal language, then signed her name at the bottom. Her signature looked shaky and uncertain next to Mrs. Chen's confident scrawl. "Get some sleep," Mrs. Chen said, handing her a key. "I've arranged a room for you at a boarding house down the street. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." But Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in the boarding house bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led her here. The torn marriage contract, the blizzard, the shack where she'd saved a dying man. Every choice had seemed small at the time, barely choices at all. Just putting one foot in front of the other, trying to survive another day. And now here she was, about to go up against one of the richest men in Montana territory, with nothing but some legal papers and her own testimony. She should be terrified. Was terrified. But underneath the fear was something else. Something hard and bright and angry. Whitmore thought he could take whatever he wanted. Thought money and power meant he could destroy people and walk away clean. Evelyn was going to prove him wrong. Or die trying. The land office opened at 8 sharp. Evelyn was waiting outside with Mrs. Chen and Marshal Hendricks, all three of them wrapped against the cold. The clerk who unlocked the door looked surprised to see them. "We don't usually get customers this early," he said. "We're filing a mining claim," Mrs. Chen said crisply, pushing past him. "And we need it registered before 9 o'clock. The clerk led them to a counter piled high with maps and ledgers. "Which claim?" "Iron Ridge, north of Red Hollow. Approximately 5 miles from—" "That's already claimed," the clerk interrupted, flipping through a ledger. "Silas Granger filed on it 3 years ago. Mr. Granger is deceased. My client is filing as discover and sole heir." The clerk looked at Evelyn, taking in her scarred face and rough clothes. "You're the heir?" "I was the last person to see him alive," Evelyn said. "He wanted me to have the mine." "Do you have proof of death?" Hendricks stepped forward. "I'm the federal marshal who recovered Mr. Granger's body. I can provide a death certificate." The clerk was looking more and more uncomfortable. "This is highly irregular. I'll need to verify—" "You'll need to accept the filing," Mrs. Chen said sharply. "My client has all the required documentation. If you refuse, I'll file a complaint with the territorial governor personally." The clerk swallowed hard. "Let me see the papers." Mrs. Chen laid them out one by one. The filing fee, $20 that the governor had fronted from his own pocket. The claim description. The surveyor's notes copied from Silas's original filing. The death certificate Hendricks had signed. And finally, Evelyn's sworn statement describing how she'd saved Silas's life and been present when he died. The clerk read through everything twice. "This is all in order," he admitted reluctantly. "But there's going to be a dispute. Mr. Whitmore has an appointment at 9 to file his own claim on the same land." "Then you'll have to tell Mr. Whitmore he's too late," Mrs. Chen said. "The claim belongs to Miss Mercer now." The clerk looked like he wanted to argue, but he just sighed and pulled out a fresh ledger page. "I'll need your full legal name for the registry." "Evelyn Margaret Mercer." He wrote it down in careful script, added the date and time, then stamped it with an official seal. "The filing is registered as of 8/17 this morning. You're now the legal claimant to the Iron Ridge silver mine, pending any disputes or challenges." "There will be challenges," a voice said from the doorway. Evelyn turned. Caleb Whitmore stood there with a man in an expensive suit who could only be Thornton Reed, the lawyer. Behind them, 3 more men, bodyguards or witnesses, Evelyn couldn't tell. "This filing is fraudulent," Whitmore said, walking forward. "That woman has no claim to anything. Silas Granger sold me that mine before he died." "Do you have proof of that sale?" Mrs. Chen asked. Thornton Reed stepped forward and laid a document on the counter. "Transfer of claim, signed by Silas Granger, witnessed by Miss Evelyn Mercer herself. We also have a receipt for $5,000 paid in good faith for the purchase." Evelyn's stomach sank. The coerced signature from Whitmore's study, the one she'd refused to witness. He'd forged her signature. "That's a lie," she said. "I never signed that." "The document speaks for itself." Reed's voice was smooth and cold. "And I have 3 witnesses who will testify they saw both signatures applied willingly." "Witnesses you paid," Hendricks said. "Witnesses who were present during a legal transaction." Reed turned to the clerk. "This woman's filing should be rejected immediately. My client has clear and documented ownership." The clerk looked between them helplessly. This is beyond my authority. You'll have to take it to a judge." "Excellent idea," Reed said. "I'll file for an emergency hearing this afternoon. We can settle this quickly and—" "Nothing about this will be quick," Mrs. Chen interrupted. "My client's filing is registered and legal. Your client can challenge it, but that means months of litigation while we investigate the circumstances of Mr. Granger's death and your client's convenient acquisition of his property." Whitmore's face had gone red. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" Evelyn stepped forward, ignoring the way her ribs protested. "I can prove your men shot Silas and left him for dead. I can prove you tried to force him to sign over the claim. I can prove you sent Reed, the other Reed, the one who works for you, to ambush a federal escort and kill 4 deputies, all to steal a mine that was never yours." "That's slander," Thornton Reed said sharply. "It's testimony," Hendricks corrected. "And I'll be delivering it to the territorial court along with a request for a full investigation into Caleb Whitmore's business practices." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Whitmore smiled, cold and confident. "You think you've won something. You haven't. All you've done is make this take longer. But I have money, Miss Mercer. I have lawyers and judges and politicians in my pocket. I can drag this out for years while you starve trying to pay legal fees." "Maybe," Evelyn said. "Or maybe your friends will start abandoning you when they realize you're toxic. When every business deal you touch turns into a scandal, every partner you have gets investigated for murder. You wanted this mine so badly you killed for it, and now everyone's going to know." Whitmore took a step toward her, and Hendricks moved between them, hand on his gun. "That's close enough." "This isn't over," Whitmore said quietly. "No," Evelyn agreed. "It's just beginning." Whitmore and his lawyer swept out, taking their witnesses with them. The clerk stood at his counter looking shaken. "I need to report this to my supervisor," he said weakly. "You do that," Mrs. Chen said. "In the meantime, my client's claim stands." Outside, the morning sun was bright on the snow. Evelyn stood on the steps of the land office and took a deep breath of cold air. Her ribs hurt, her arm hurt, everything hurt. But she'd done it, filed the claim, faced down Whitmore, made it official. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we prepare for war," Mrs. Chen said. "Whitmore will file his challenge today, probably by noon. We'll get a court date, probably within the week given how much money he's throwing around. And then we fight every inch of ground until a judge rules in our favor or Whitmore gives up." "He won't give up." "Then neither will we." Mrs. Chen put a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "You did good in there. Most people would have folded when Whitmore showed up." "Most people didn't watch him murder a good man for money," Evelyn said quietly. Hendricks had been watching the street, making sure no one was following them. Now he turned back. "You need to stay somewhere safe. Whitmore knows he can't kill you now. It would look too suspicious. But that doesn't mean he won't try to intimidate you." "I'm done being intimidated." "I know, but humor me anyway." He gestured down the street. "There's a hotel near the federal building. I'll post a deputy outside your door." Evelyn wanted to argue, to insist she could take care of herself. But 4 deputies had died trying to protect her, and she owed it to their memory not to be stupid about this. "All right," she said. "A hotel." They walked through Helena's streets together, 3 people who'd somehow become allies in a fight none of them had wanted. Evelyn thought about Silas, dying in the snow, asking her to take his mine and make something of herself. She'd promised him she would try. She was keeping that promise, no matter what it cost. The hotel room was nicer than anywhere Evelyn had ever stayed, with real glass in the windows and a bed that didn't sag in the middle. But she barely noticed. She spent that first night sitting at the small desk, going over her testimony with Mrs. Chen, preparing for the court hearing that Whitmore's lawyer had scheduled for Friday morning. "He'll try to make you look unreliable," Mrs. Chen said, pacing the room. "A desperate woman who latched onto a dying man's ravings. He'll bring up the scar, imply you're mentally unstable, suggest you killed Silas yourself to steal the mine." "I saved Silas's life." And you'll need to prove that without sounding defensive. Judges don't like emotion. They like facts. Mrs. Chen stopped pacing. Tell me again exactly what happened when you found him. Evelyn had told the story so many times it was starting to feel rehearsed, which Mrs. Chen said was both good and bad. Good because it meant she wouldn't stumble over details. Bad because rehearsed testimony sounded fake. Just tell the truth, Mrs. Chen said finally. That's all you can do. But the truth felt slippery. Yes, she'd saved Silas. Yes, he'd told her to take the mine. But had he been in his right mind? Had he really meant it? Or was it just fever talk from a dying man who didn't want to die alone? Evelyn had asked herself these questions 100 times, and she still didn't have clean answers. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock Friday morning in the territorial courthouse, an imposing brick building that made Evelyn feel small just looking at it. Mrs. Chen had borrowed a dress for her, dark blue and respectable, that hid most of the bruises. But there was no hiding the scar. Wear it proud, Mrs. Chen had said. Don't let them make you ashamed of it. Easy to say, harder to do when you walked into a courtroom and felt every eye go straight to the twisted skin on your face. Judge Morrison was a thin man with white hair and eyes that gave away nothing. He listened to Thornton Reed's opening statement without expression. A story of a legitimate business transaction corrupted by a desperate woman who'd attached herself to a dying prospector. Miss Mercer is a confidence artist, Reed said smoothly. She admits she came to Montana to marry for money. When that fell through, she found another mark. Silas Granger, a simple mountain man with a valuable claim and no family to protect him. Objection, Mrs. Chen said. Counsel is making assumptions not in evidence. Sustained. Mr. Reed, stick to facts. Reed didn't even blink. The facts are these. Silas Granger signed a legal transfer of his mining claim to my client, Caleb Whitmore, for $5,000. This transaction was witnessed and notarized. 3 days later, Mr. Granger died. And suddenly Miss Mercer appears, claiming the mine belongs to her based on nothing but her own testimony. My client's testimony is supported by physical evidence, Mrs. Chen countered. Medical records showing she treated a gunshot wound consistent with Mr. Granger's injuries. Witness statements from Copper Falls residents who saw her arrive half-frozen and bleeding. And the testimony of Federal Marshal Hendricks regarding the circumstances of Mr. Granger's death. None of which proves she has any legal claim to the mine, Reed said. Judge Morrison held up a hand. I've read both filings. This appears to be a question of conflicting claims on the same property. Miss Mercer, you filed first, which gives you standing. But Mr. Whitmore's transfer document predates your filing. So the question before this court is simple. Which claim is legitimate? Mr. Granger's signature was coerced, Evelyn said before Mrs. Chen could stop her. Whitmore's men beat him and threatened to kill him if he didn't sign. Do you have proof for that? Judge Morrison asked. I was there. I saw it. So your proof is your own testimony, which Mr. Whitmore's witnesses will contradict. The judge looked at her over his glasses. Miss Mercer, I appreciate that you've been through an ordeal, but the law requires more than accusations. It requires evidence. I have evidence, Evelyn said. 4 dead federal deputies, an attempted kidnapping, a mine worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and a man willing to kill for it. Circumstantial at best, Reed interjected. Your Honor, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Miss Mercer is making wild accusations to cover up the fact that she has no legitimate claim. The claim papers were stolen from her, Mrs. Chen said, by men working for Mr. Whitmore. Allegedly stolen, allegedly working for my client. Reed smiled. If Miss Mercer was robbed, she should report it to the authorities, but that has no bearing on the validity of the transfer document Mr. Granger signed. Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Here's what's going to happen. I'm ordering an independent investigation into the circumstances of Silas Granger's death. Marshal Hendricks, you'll lead it. I want interviews with everyone involved, forensic examination of the transfer document to verify the signatures, and a full accounting of Mr. Whitmore's whereabouts on the dates in question. Your Honor, this is highly irregular, Reed protested. So is having 4 federal deputies murdered in an ambush. The judge's voice was cold. I don't like coincidences, Mr. Reed, and there are too many coincidences in this case. Until the investigation is complete, I'm freezing all claims on the Iron Ridge property. Neither party can take possession, sell, or otherwise dispose of the mine. Court is adjourned. He banged his gavel and stood, sweeping out of the courtroom before either lawyer could argue. Evelyn sat there feeling numb. It wasn't a victory. The judge hadn't ruled in her favor, but it wasn't a loss either. She was still in the fight. That went better than I expected, Mrs. Chen said quietly. Morrison's a fair man. He won't let Whitmore buy his way out of this. Across the courtroom, Caleb Whitmore was in heated conversation with Thornton Reed. Even from a distance, Evelyn could see the anger in his face. He'd expected to walk out with clear ownership of the mine, and instead he'd gotten an investigation that would dig into everything he'd done. As they filed out of the courtroom, Whitmore caught Evelyn's arm. His grip was hard enough to bruise. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "A very expensive mistake." Evelyn pulled free. "The only mistake was yours. You should have just let me freeze to death in that blizzard." "I'm starting to think you're right." His eyes were flat and cold. "But it's not too late to fix it." "Mr. Whitmore," Marshal Hendricks appeared beside them, hand resting on his gun belt. "I believe the judge said no contact between parties during the investigation." "I was just leaving." Whitmore adjusted his coat. "Enjoy your victory, Miss Mercer." "It won't last." He walked out, Reed trailing behind him. Evelyn watched them go and felt her hands shaking. "He's going to try something," she said. "Let him try." Hendricks guided her toward the exit. "He's being watched now. Every move he makes, every person he talks to, every dollar he spends. If he so much as looks at you wrong, I'll have him in chains." The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Evelyn living in that hotel room, testimony from her with Mrs. Chen present, watching deputies come and go with reports and evidence. Hendricks worked 18-hour days, traveling between Helena and Red Hollow, interviewing everyone who'd ever had contact with Silas Granger or Caleb Whitmore. He found the guard who'd let Evelyn escape, a man named Tommy, who was so terrified of Reed's men that he'd gone into hiding. Hendricks convinced him to testify in exchange for protection, and his statement corroborated everything Evelyn had said about the kidnapping. He found the mercantile owner in Red Hollow, who reluctantly admitted he'd seen Whitmore's men rough up Silas on multiple occasions. "Everyone knew Whitmore wanted that mine," the man said. "We just didn't think he'd kill for it." He found discrepancies in the transfer document. The notary seal was from a man who died 6 months before the document was supposedly signed. Reed had made a mistake, and it was enough to prove forgery. And then he found something nobody expected. Hendricks came to Evelyn's hotel room late one night, his face grim. "We need to talk." "What is it?" "The mine. We sent a team up to Iron Ridge to do an independent assay, see if it's really worth what Silas claimed." He sat down heavily. "Evelyn, there's no silver." She stared at him. "What?" "The mine is empty. There was silver once, maybe, but it's been played out for years. A few traces in the rock, enough to make you think there might be more, but nothing worth mining commercially." Evelyn felt the world tilt. "That's impossible. Silas said Silas was wrong, or lying, or maybe just desperate to believe there was treasure in that mountain." Hendricks pulled out a report and laid it on the table. "The mining engineer I hired says the whole thing is worthless. Maybe worth $5,000 if you sold it for salvage, but that's it." "Then why did Whitmore want it so badly?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Hendricks leaned back. "I've been thinking about it. What if Whitmore didn't know the mine was worthless? What if he believed Silas the same way you did?" It made a terrible kind of sense. Whitmore had sent men to kill for a mine he thought was worth a fortune, had forged documents, murdered federal deputies, risked everything, all for a hole in the ground that contained nothing but empty rock and broken dreams. "Does he know yet?" Evelyn asked. "That it's worthless?" "I haven't told him, but his lawyers will get a copy of the assay report tomorrow morning." Hendricks watched her carefully. "What are you thinking?" Evelyn was thinking about Silas, bleeding in the snow, insisting the mine would make her rich. About the tin box buried under the third beam, the claim papers that had cost so many lives. About everything she'd gone through to get here, and it was all for nothing. "I'm thinking I want to be there when Whitmore finds out," she said quietly. The next morning, Evelyn and Hendricks went to Whitmore's hotel. He was staying at the finest place in Helena, a suite that probably cost more per night than Evelyn had earned in a month at the factory. The clerk tried to turn them away, but Hendricks showed his badge, and they went up anyway. Whitmore answered the door in his shirt sleeves, a cigar in one hand. "What the hell do you want?" "To deliver the assay report personally," Hendricks said, holding out the document. Whitmore snatched it and started reading. Evelyn watched his face as comprehension dawned. The color drained from his cheeks. The cigar fell from his fingers. "This is wrong," he said. "This has to be wrong." "It's been verified by 3 independent engineers," Hendricks said. "The Iron Ridge mine is worthless. Always has been." Whitmore looked at Evelyn, and she saw something she'd never expected to see in his face. Defeat. "I killed people for this," he said quietly. "Spent a fortune. Destroyed my reputation. All for a worthless hole in the ground." "Yes," Evelyn said. "You did. Was it worth it?" Whitmore's voice was bitter. "Was proving you could steal from a dying man worth everything you lost?" "I didn't steal anything," Whitmore said, "but there was no conviction in it. Granger offered to sell. I made a fair offer. You beat him, threatened him, hunted him down like an animal." Evelyn stepped closer. "And for what? The mine's worthless, your reputation is ruined, and you're probably going to prison for murder. Congratulations, Mr. Whitmore. You won." She turned and walked out, Hendricks following. Behind them, they heard something crash. Whitmore throwing furniture, she guessed, or maybe just his life falling apart. The trial took 2 months to prepare and 3 days to complete. The evidence was overwhelming. Witness testimony, forged documents, the confession from Tommy the guard. Thornton Reed did his best, but even the best lawyer in Montana Territory couldn't overcome simple facts. Caleb Whitmore was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and a dozen other charges. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in the territorial prison. His ranch was seized to pay restitution to the families of the murdered deputies. His businesses collapsed. Everything he'd built, gone in a matter of months. And Evelyn watched it all from the gallery, feeling no triumph, just a hollow kind of satisfaction that at least some measure of justice had been served. After the sentencing, Mrs. Chen found her on the courthouse steps. "What are you going to do now?" the lawyer asked. Evelyn had been thinking about that. The mine was hers legally. The judge had ruled in her favor once it became clear Whitmore's claim was fraudulent, but a worthless mine wasn't much of a prize. "I don't know," she admitted. "I spent everything getting here. I have a mine that's worth nothing and 47 cents to my name." "Actually, you have a bit more than that." Mrs. Chen handed her an envelope. "The territorial government is offering compensation to you for your role in exposing Whitmore's crimes. Call it a reward for your testimony." Evelyn opened the envelope. Inside was a bank draft for $15,000. She stared at it, unable to process the number. "This is more money more than you've ever seen. I know." Mrs. Chen smiled. "Use it wisely. Build something. Become someone who matters." "I don't know how to be someone who matters." "Yes, you do. You just spent 3 months proving it." Mrs. Chen squeezed her shoulder. "You stood up to the most powerful man in the territory and won. If that doesn't make you someone who matters, I don't know what does." Evelyn took the money and left Helena a week later. She could have stayed. Mrs. Chen had offered her work, and there were other lawyers who needed investigators and assistants. But Helena felt too crowded, too full of memories she didn't want to keep. Instead, she went back to Red Hollow. The town looked smaller than she remembered. The hotel where Caleb had humiliated her. The mercantile where she'd traded her mother's ring for medical supplies. The boarding house where Mrs. Chen had turned her away. All still there, but diminished somehow. Less threatening. She bought the old shack on the mountain where she'd saved Silas's life. Paid cash for it, along with the 20 acres surrounding it. Then she hired workers from town, men who'd lost their jobs when Whitmore's ranch collapsed, and started building. Not a house, a factory. She'd learned textile work in Pennsylvania, and Montana needed textiles just like everywhere else. She bought equipment, hired seamstresses, set up contracts with merchants in Helena and Copper Falls and beyond. Within 6 months, the Red Hollow textile mill was producing more fabric than anywhere else in the territory. And Evelyn Mercer, the scarred woman who'd been rejected in the snow, became one of the wealthiest women in Montana. She hired Mrs. Chen from the boarding house as her head of operations, paying her 3 times what she'd made renting rooms. She hired Tommy the guard as her foreman, giving him a second chance. She hired the daughters of the murdered deputies and made sure they had jobs that would support their families. And one day, about a year after the trial, she went up to Iron Ridge. The mine entrance was still there, dark and waiting. Evelyn stood at the threshold and thought about everything that had happened in these tunnels. The fear, the desperation, the moment she'd pulled those claim papers from their hiding place thinking they'd make her rich. She thought about Silas dying in the snow, insisting the mine was worth a fortune. Had he known it was worthless? Had he lied to give her hope, or had he believed it himself right up to the end? She'd never know. But it didn't matter anymore, because Silas had been right about one thing. The mine had made her rich. Just not the way either of them had expected. It wasn't the silver that had value. It was what she'd been willing to do to protect it. The stand she'd taken, the fight she'd refused to abandon, the way she'd turned injustice into something that resembled justice. That was worth more than any mine could ever be. Evelyn went back down the mountain and didn't visit Iron Ridge again. She donated the land to the territory to be used as a public park, a place where anyone could go without having to own it, or work it, or kill for it. They put up a plaque with Silas's name on it, calling him an honest prospector who died defending what was his. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was close enough. 5 years later, Evelyn Mercer stood on the steps of her textile mill and watched workers file in for the morning shift. Women mostly, because she hired women others wouldn't touch. The ones with scars, with histories, with reasons to be grateful for work that paid fair wages and didn't ask questions. She thought about the woman she'd been when she stepped off that stage in Red Hollow. Desperate, alone, willing to marry a stranger just for the promise of security. That woman had died somewhere in the snow and been replaced by someone harder, stronger, less willing to accept what others said she deserved. The scar was still there on her face, would always be there. But when people looked at her now, they didn't see a disfigured woman. They saw Evelyn Mercer, mill owner, businesswoman, the person who'd brought down Caleb Whitmore and built an empire on the ruins. She'd learned something important in that frozen shack with Silas dying beside her. That the measure of a person wasn't what they looked like, or who wanted to marry them, or how perfect their skin was. It was what they did when everything fell apart. Whether they gave up or kept fighting. Whether they let the bastards win or made them pay for every inch of ground. Evelyn had made them pay. And she was still making them pay, one job at a time, one woman at a time, one life rebuilt from nothing. That was worth more than all the silver in Montana. Worth more than marriage to a rich rancher or acceptance by people who'd never see past her scar anyway. She'd come west looking for someone to save her, and instead she'd learned to save herself. That was the real treasure. Not silver in the ground, but strength in the soul. The kind of strength that said you mattered even when the world insisted you didn't. Evelyn Mercer mattered. She'd made sure of it. And anyone who thought otherwise could take it up with her lawyers.
La cucaracha, la cucaracha.
I close my eyes for 2 minutes. I love when Ben whispers to us. Is Zerty got his shit downloaded or what? It's been 5 minutes. Invite Zerty again. If he doesn't join, we fucking kill him. And you get up to this shit. I kind of want to fucking... Oh, man, I'm excited to play Long Dark tonight. I fucking love that game. La cucaracha. He's checking Apex stuff real quick. Can you tell him to hurry the fuck up? He said 5 minutes. It's been 5 minutes.
Maybe he's buying something.
Or maybe he needs to fucking not.
Don't ever whisper again. What the fuck?
Oh, but he's listening and doing loud instead. That's beautiful, Ben.
What the fuck? Okay, that was really loud.
It's installing, James. Dude, it's literally like a megabyte. It's 1 megabyte, bro. Good job, Ben.
I don't like yelling, guys. Look, there's us on the camera.
What?
You can see us on the camera.
Oh my god, wait, where is the camera? Invite Zerty again. Such a good
It's right there,
diglet.
you see? It's that little ball.
That's gotta be racist. Oh, it is that ball.
Oh, I'm hitting it. Oh, I'm hitting it.
Oh. Ben, invite him again. That's gotta be racist, bro. Somehow it is. Oh, sounds like there's snot in that one, dude. Oh. That one was. Oh, that one made me for real uncomfortable.
Is there a tizzle? You're so fucking quiet.